everyone, it's I, Whack Anime What If, here to present you with What If Issei Was in Arrancar, Part 6. This is the redo. I hope you like it. And also, if you haven't heard, I have a second channel, a gaming channel where I play Among Us, Resident Evil, and other things like that. Mostly later on, but let's go ahead and get into this. Issei had just opened the door after having a decent day, hanging out with Koneko and them, but once he opened the door, he saw something that he was not expecting. He saw Grimmjow holding his mother by the neck and plunging his hand directly through her chest, and her heart was in the palm of his hand. This was a terrifying thing for Issei, but honestly, it should have been a terrifying thing, but it really wasn't. To him, he should be relieved. He knows he should be, considering he was always beaten by this woman. But for some reason, he was so angry. It's because after everything that she's done to him, he still cares. And this just infuriated him, seeing this happen. And when Grimmjow looked at him with this smile, ear-to-ear smile, saying, "Yo, what's up?" This just made Issei snap a little, because he had just killed his mother and just acted like nothing happened and said hi to me. What the hell's wrong with this man? He got so angry that he didn't know he was unconsciously sending out spiritual pressure. It was enough to make Grimmjow quite surprised, and he grinned even wider. While Issei's hair went above his eyes, his hair went over his eyes, and he stared directly at his mother, who plopped to the floor once Grimmjow let go. And Issei immediately disappeared from Grimmjow's view. Grimmjow was wondering where he went. Right when he was about to let go of Issei's mother, he grabbed her again, knowing that he's probably going to go for her. But once he grabbed onto her wrist, he noticed that his hand was gone. And he screamed out a little bit out of pain. And then he noticed that Issei is in the kitchen now. They were just in the living room when all this happened. He had just stepped into the living room. But now he is all the way behind Grimmjow, with his mother in hand and her heart in his other hand. His right hand had his mother, and his left hand had her heart. He's placing the heart directly into her chest, and is asking someone to heal her. He ended up asking someone known as Drake, which Grimmjow doesn't really get. Does his resurrection also heal people? He doesn't really get what his powers are. And Issei's point of view: I have my mother in my arms now. I just need to heal her. Drake, can you do anything? Drake appeared out of his left hand with the heart in hand. Issei plunges it directly into his mother's chest and asks for Drake to heal her at any means necessary. And Drake ends up asking, by any means necessary, do you mean you'll give up your lifespan for this woman? And Issei ended up saying, you know, I always used to hate her. I mean, she always beat me. She always didn't care about me. She didn't really love me at all. But when I was a kid, she wasn't like that. And I hope she can change. I believe she can. And as soon as Issei said these words, his mother's eyes opened up and said, "I'm sorry about that," before they slowly had tears creeping out. And Issei didn't know his mother was awake. And Issei plunged the heart into her chest and said, "Don't worry, I forgive you." I mean, honestly, I'd be freaked out if my son or daughter didn't have emotions either, I guess. I mean, I didn't have them previously, but I managed to gain them. And I managed to actually care for someone. And I hope I can care for you too. And I hope you can care for me. Is what Issei said as he got Drake to heal her. He ended up asking Drake to leave his body and go to her, if possible, for a short duration of time. And Drake ended up asking, why would you ask this, partner? While Issei merely said, because, if I'm correct, you won't be able to heal her completely if I'm fighting. While having to hold her, that'll just have me at a big disadvantage. I'm surprised that Grimmjow is currently just waiting patiently for me. That's honestly quite a shock. At first I thought he was just a mad hound. In Grimmjow's point of view, he's wondering what that thing on his left hand is. It looks like a glove or a gauntlet of some sort. He's quite curious. So he's observing. And he's wanting to know if Issei can unleash more power. Because whenever something was taken from Ichigo, he unleashed a ton of power also. He's wondering if Issei is similar to Ichigo in some way like that. So he's observing him, because he finds him interesting right now. Issei is currently asking Drake to leave him, which he does. He goes into the heart that's in his left hand as he shoves the heart into his mother's chest. Once it goes in, it starts to attach around everywhere else in her blood vessels and reconnects. And starts to slowly heal, and the wound starts to close. Grimmjow's fascinated by this and asks, so, you have healing powers? I didn't expect someone that was so strong before to have actual healing powers. That was quite bizarre, honestly. Usually, some Espada or some Arrancar have regeneration, but you seem to be able to heal others. That's quite... And before he could even continue speaking, his face felt a sudden pain, and he sees that Issei's left fist was punched right into his jaw. He moved his head to the side a little bit and didn't budge, and he merely moved his jaw to the left, crushing Issei's left hand with just his jawbone bone. And he ends up saying, but the thing is, you're quite weak. He punches Issei in the guts extremely hard, and he flies out of his house, and he flies into the neighbor's house, which he ends up seeing the neighbors eating dinner in their kitchen. Once he flied through the front door, he landed right on the table, and he notices that if he doesn't get out, then Grimmjow's just gonna... And before he could even think about getting out, he sees a red beam coming at him, and he's thinking about how to shield them. He immediately gets out his blade, slices at the red beam. Once he slices it in half, he sees a Grimmjow coming directly out of it, and he gets punched in the side extremely hard to the left side, and he flies 50 meters away. And right before he could get his common ground or even touch the ground, Grimmjow's directly under him and punches him upwards. He flies into the air from that mad punch in the back, and he feels like his back itself is breaking from that impact. As Issei is starting to think, what should I do exactly? How do I beat him? He's much more experienced than me. As his Zanpakuto, as his weapon starts to resonate with him just slightly, he hears a certain name, and he's thinking about saying it, but he realizes one thing. Wouldn't this lead to me going to the state from before? And if so, is that really okay? Doing it when all these people are here? What would happen if I accidentally hurt them? What would happen if I went on a rampage? I don't know this power. I don't know what it can do, is what Issei is thinking while he's falling to the ground. But Grimmjow doesn't give him the chance to fall to the ground. He's right in front of him now. As soon as Issei blinked, Grimmjow's right in front of him in midair. And he pulls out his blade and slices directly at Issei's arm. Issei counters with his left hand and blocks it, so that his right arm isn't chopped up clean off. But his left hand is cut very deeply in the wrist area. And Issei had grabbed on to the blade. Even though it cut into his wrist, he grabbed onto it. And he punched with his right fist directly into Grimjow's gut, making him launch up in the air. And Grimjow ended up saying, "Wow, that actually hurt a little bit," and coughed out a little bit of blood while smiling. And Issei at this moment felt like a prey being looked at by a predator. He doesn't want this to go like the last time. So once he hits the ground, he gets up, he looks directly where Grimjow is falling, and he launches himself directly outwards. And he punches him with as much power as he can muster, unconsciously putting spiritual pressure around his fist. As he punched directly into Grimjow's head, he ended up sending some spiritual pressure directly into his brain, which has never been done before. And Grimjow gets punched away, and he lands in a familiar area. He's all the way in Kohai. He's been punched through 2 classrooms, and class is in session. So all these students see a man with blue hair flying through their classroom, and they're all screaming, wondering what's happening. Some people almost got hit by him, but luckily they didn't get hit by him. It was just above them. He flew just above them, just a little bit away from their heads. If he would have collided with them, their heads would have exploded. He's punched out of 2 classrooms, all the way to the outside and the front of Kohai. And Issei mad dashed towards where Grimjow was. As soon as he managed to make it to the front of Kohai, he screamed out, "Grimjow! I'm gonna make you pay for what you did, for what you tried to do. The fact you tried to go after my innocent mother, and the fact that you keep on going after everyone I care for. I will not tolerate this. This is unacceptable!" As he screamed out in fury, he ended up using his blade, putting it in front of him, and saying, "Empty Dragon and the Oni, Zangshiro, Resurrection 2. And once he said this, it wasn't the previous form that was incomplete. It was something different that emerged. There was a dark, dark blood coming out of Issei. It was coming out of his mouth, his eyes. It was coming out everywhere all over his body. It was coming out of the ground and emerging above him. And it was circling around him, twisting around him into a hurricane of black liquid that was presumed to be blood. And all of a sudden, these bone wings came out of Issei. His back, there was bone wings emerging out. His face, there was half of a skeleton mask of a dragon and half of a skeleton mask of an Oni. His right side had an Oni mask made out of bones. His left side had a dragon mask that was also made out of bones, but it was completely pitch black, and the other one was red bones, dyed in the blood of the Oni. And Issei's body bulked up. He got taller. He was a few feet taller. He was around 7 feet now. And his eyes, they were completely pitch black in one. The one where the dragon mask was black, and the other one was completely pure crimson red. And he had massive teeth. His teeth ended up sharpening, and he let out a mighty roar, and all the blood around him just exploded. And his arms shredded out, and these bone-like arms came out of his body, from his back where the wings were. He had 7 arms from his back. He had giant skeleton dragon wings, and he had grown to 7 feet. And these horns came out of his head. He looked at Grimjow and said, "You are gonna die, here and now." While Grimjow got into a stance and said, "Oh, I'd like to see you try." They both ran at each other at blinding speeds. You could only see a blue blur, and Issei's hair was turning completely black while he was running towards Grimjow at blinding speeds. You could see a black blur. And all of a sudden, these two people disappeared, and they appeared beside each other. Issei immediately felt a pain into his right arm. Then he looked at it, and it was completely cut off. He looked at Grimmjow and said, "I win." While Grimmjow just says, "What do you mean, you would?" And all of a sudden, his gut explodes. There was a giant hole in it. His face, his left side of his face, part of his face is gone. And he was punched in 7 different directions. His gut was punched a hole open. The left side of his face was punched so hard that his eyeball is completely crushed, and he didn't even notice it. It was a pain after effect. It was after Issei's blow came through that he felt it. After a few minutes of it happening, he was so powerful that his body couldn't handle it, so it made sure the pain didn't exist. Grimmjow nullified the pain, his mind did, to where all of a sudden Grimmjow just couldn't handle it. He screamed out in pain, looked down, his entire gut had a huge hole, his guts and insides were spilling out, and his left leg was blown clean off. His right arm had a giant hole in it, and his left side of his face almost blew apart. The fact he didn't notice this was because his brain was shutting down his pain sensors at the moment, and it was delayed effect damage. Once Grimmjow looked at Issei, he ended up saying, "Nice job, you son of a bitch. You got me." And he coughs out and falls down to the ground. And Issei merely kicks him a few meters away and says, "I know you're not dead, you son of a bitch." And he flies all the way into the familiar forest. While Grimmjow is flying there, he's saying, "Damn it, he didn't fall for that." It was worth a try. And as Issei starts sprinting after him, and Grimmjow is flying towards the forest at a fascinating speed, rolling side to side, he ends up thinking, should I use Pantera? I think I should, considering whenever I go to my resurrection state, unlike when I was fighting Issei, I can actually heal my injuries now whenever I go into resurrection state, so I guess I'm gonna have to do this. As he takes out his blade from his side that he originally had in his hand, but he sheathed because he thought he killed Issei. And that one move, once he sliced into his arm, because originally he didn't think he sliced into his arm, he thought he sliced into, well, his neck. But Issei was so quick that he blocked it with his right arm, the reason why his arm's missing. And as soon as he pulled out his blade, he noticed that Issei was above him, and he said, "Oh shit, wasn't enough time." And Issei, with his left hand, ends up charging up as much spiritual pressure into his hand as possible. And then he says, "Black blood, Oni blood, the dragon blood, hear my cry and my roar, and embody my fist with the power of the death god and the god of life, and charge forth." He ended up saying this and said, "Special ability, the death blazing fist," and the black blood turned into flames, and they were completely pitch black. They were the embodiment of pure evil in Grimmjow's eyes. It was something of terror that made his bones and his body shrivel up. And he screamed out, for it not to hit him. And as soon as Issei punched downwards to Grimmjow's face, a giant explosion ensued. There was a crater. Not even a crater. It was a bottomless pit where Grimmjow once was. And Issei is floating a little bit above the bottomless pit. And he starts descending downwards. And he's thinking in his head, I might have overdid it that time. And once he descends all the way downwards, after a few hours, he reaches at the bottom. After 7 hours. And he assumes that it's more than 700,000 feet, because he was descending at a massive speed. An It was an incredible speed that no one could go to. And the fact that he finally reached the bottom was quite reassuring, because now he can confirm if Grimmjow's actually dead. And as soon as he hits the bottom, he notices it's completely dark. So he ends up using some of the black flames from earlier that still reside into his left fist, that was burning his fist, as a backlash. And once he used it, he saw that Grimmjow was still up. How? How is this possible? And Grimmjow had nothing but one of his hands left, his head and part of his torso. He was completely destroyed from the waist down. His legs were completely blown off and seemed like they were just disintegrated. So was majority of his upper body, but he was still holding on. And Issei walks towards him as menacingly as possible, as slow as possible. He wants him to feel the fear that others have felt. He knows this man has ended so many lives. He can tell just from how he presents himself and how he acts, and the fact that he mercilessly tried to kill his mother. When he's walking towards him, Grimmjow looks at him, and he feels one thing he never thought he'd feel in this lifetime: fear. But that subsides when he says Pantera, and he goes into his resurrection state, and his limbs regenerate. He's back into full strength, and he looks at Issei, or where Issei was, and he notices he's gone. Where did he go? And he looks behind him, and he sees nothing. He assumed he was going to be behind him, and then once he tries to look to the other side, before he could, he hears a whisper behind him. Yo, how you doing? And he looks behind him once more and sees Issei, but before he could even react, he was plunged straight through the gut again. And Issei regenerated his other hand and grabbed Grimmjow with such force to the neck that it felt like it was going to break. He threw him directly out of the bottomless pit, or supposedly bottomless pit, and he flew 700,000 meters above in that one throw. And Issei merely said, "I can't continue using this form for so long," in his mind, because he felt like he was going to his limit. He used too much power in that last attack, and his form is still unstable. He rushed all the way upwards, and he punched Grimmjow directly into the face as soon as he reached out into the familiar woods, the familiar forest. As soon as he reached outwards to where everyone could see, where Reese and all of them had gathered, they saw Issei blitz very quickly all the way up out of the bottomless pit, they assumed, to punch Grimmjow directly into the face. And Grimmjow was punched into the air so quickly and so fast that it amplified the punch. The punch literally split the sky apart. The clouds moved away for this impact, and Grimmjow felt quite literally powerless at this moment. And Grimmjow just hated this feeling. And he ended up screaming, "Why? Why? This is the most excited feeling I could ever feel in a battle, though." And he merely looked at Issei and decided to try to charge forward. His death be damned. He wanted to just have a great fight. Screw everything else. And plus he has a score to settle with him. So, screw Aizen's original plan. And he's launched at him before Aizen appeared, directly in the middle of Issei and Grimmjow when they're about to charge at each other. And all Aizen did was hold up his hand in front of both of them. And Issei punched directly into his hand, trying to punch through to Grimmjow. And once he did, all that Aizen did was merely twist his hand slightly. Aizen twisted his hand slightly, and Issei's whole arm popped off. It ripped off. And he looked at Grimmjow and said, "Grimmjow, you're done." And Grimmjow just says, "I'm not done. I want to continue fight." And before he could say anything, Aizen said, "Oh, I don't think you understand. I mean, you're done." He put up his hand in front of Grimmjow's head, and blasts out Ahado. He says, Shaka Ho. And Grimmjow was not expecting this blast to come, so he didn't prepare. His head was completely blown off clean. And Aizen merely said, I thought this pawn would be useful. He wasn't exactly loyal, and he knew what I did previously, but I had incentive for him. I told him that if he were to do what I asked, I'd send him back to our universe to fight Issei Hyodo, to fight Ichigo Kurosaki, but he wanted to fight Issei Hyodo so bad, he almost ruined my plans. He almost gave away everything in that one instant. After all, I still need something from him. As he walked closer to Grimmjow's corpse, and Issei was holding his arm in pain. He tried to reattach it or regenerate it, but he couldn't. His regeneration was at the limit. And he merely looked at Aizen, who walked to retrieve Grimmjow's corpse. He picked it up and looked at Issei before saying, "You're too weak. You think you might be strong, and you might be strong compared to these devils, but you're nothing compared to me. After all, I am Sosuke Aizen, and you are just merely Issei Hyodo, a worthless person who couldn't even save his own mother." And Issei merely says, "I saved her, though. I managed to save her. I'm not worthless." And once he said this, Aizen merely said, "Oh yeah, I left you a present. I forgot to show you it." And he pulls out something out of his coat, and he places it directly in front of Issei. And Issei didn't even notice that Aizen was in front of him. He placed the head on the ground, and Issei saw the head, and he was enraged. He was furious. It was the head of his mother. He had just healed. He just got Drake to heal her. And then he wonders, wait, where's Drake? In his rage, he managed to get that one question through. Because after everything that his mother put him through and he forgave her, he wanted her to live, but he also wanted Drake. Because Drake was, well, he was quite the powerhouse, and he would help him get his revenge on Grimmjow. And he was there for him for just a little bit. And it felt odd. Because he doesn't sense Drake anywhere in his body anymore. He sensed an energy before, but even when he detached Drake. And all of a sudden, he looked at Aizen, and Aizen merely says, "Oh yeah, there was something very interesting attached to him, so I took it for myself." And in Aizen's left hand, Drake appears. And he says, "Also, I found out that the thing attached to her was quite interesting. It's very strong. Well, it's strong as it is now, but once I'm done with my experiments, it'll make me even stronger." He grabs Grimmjow's corpse and goes and opens a portal going to Wako Mundo and hops through. Issei tried to follow, but Reese, Konako, Sir Zex, Akeno, and Kiba all stop him. They all hold him back while Issei's still trying to go through. And they tell him, "You're bleeding. You're gonna bleed out if you don't just calm down." And Issei merely looks at the person who said this, and it was Kiba. He slaps the shit out of Kiba and says, "Calm down? Huh? This fucker just killed my mother and took something that was originally mine. And he will continue taking everything I care about until I have nothing left. I only have very few things, and he took majority of them." And Issei, blinded by rage, runs off after Aizen, but he doesn't make it to the portal. It closes, and he looks at the Grimmery household, at all of them in fury, and he leaves. Konako tries to stop him and says, "Issei, don't go." And Issei looks at her and says, "Why did you have to stop me? I thought that I could genuinely care for you. I thought you cared for me too. But apparently if you're going to just stop me from avenging my own mother and attaining the one thing that would help make me the happiest right now, then just why? Why did you ever befriend me? I think I would have been much happier if I'd never met you. And he walks away, while Konako cries, and she's on the ground, crying, and everyone's comforting her, as Issei walks away. And that's where I'm going to end What If Issei Was an Arrancar, Part 6.